Okay.
Okay. So we're going to move on now to E22001.
Please.
Okay, so I'm going to try to give you a brief summary based on the information that was presented and reviewed by the complaint committee.
Tim has
I'm sorry,
something.
can I, sorry to interrupt, Maddie. I know you're just going to start.
Please.
Mr. Chair, I sent over email to the board and copied David a little key to use pseudonymous terms so that we don't use names of individuals or organizations or municipalities. So rather than use those names, please use the sort of pseudonymous names there. Engineer 1, the town, firm 2. That way we can talk about these different organizations and entities and keep them separate as we discuss them. And we can do it in open session so the public can see what's going on, but we're not giving away, we don't want to shed any aspersions on anyone improperly. So this allows us to discuss it openly and still not name names. If there's anything that the board needs to discuss for legal obligations and duties, of course, that might be appropriate for executive session whenever the board feels appropriate, but that's we can do as much of this in public as we can with that key. Thank you.
Okay, so this complaint relates to the way that an application to a planning board for a condominium project was approached and processed. So I'll do my best to kind of summarize the voluminous information that we have on this situation. So back in May of 2020, some drawings were submitted for preliminary review by an engineering firm. And there were 3 engineers that are going to be referred to during this conversation as, you know, engineer 1, 2, and 3, to the best that we're able to do that. The responsible engineer, which is engineer 2, sealed the drawings, and they based their work on a boundary survey that was provided outside of this firm commissioning it. It was either brought in by the developer or brought in initially in another way. But based on this initial survey, it identified a portion of the complainant's property as being owned by the developer, which, as you can imagine, created a very stressful situation for that property owner. And during the processing of the application by the planning board and the community involved, there was a lot of back and forth about how this get resolved. And as a result of that, in the end, this person had to go up and get their own survey to be done by another firm, firm 2 of our group, in our key, and basically prove their ownership. So over the course of several years and expense, this individual had to kind of put up a fight to maintain their property rights. The question is, of these other engineers, 1, 2, and 3 that are involved, is what their situations were as related to that, and whether they have any violations of our code of ethics or any engineering standards that the board needs to take action on. David, do you feel like, and Tim, have I set the tone of what this is enough to move to the next discussion?
Yeah, I think that's the fundamental issue that started this.
Okay, unless you guys feel like there's anything to add, I'll keep on going. Okay, so now we got to look at we don't license firms, we license individuals. So we want to talk about engineer 1, 2, and 3 separately. And I'm just going to take them not necessarily in the order of 1, 2, 3, but in the order where I think the most clear situation, or at least the committee's recommendation of how we might proceed is. So engineer 3 had a very minor role in covering during a planning board meeting for the responsible engineer, which is engineer 2. Engineer 2 was the primary person that was involved in this whole thing. So that person stood up and identified themselves as an engineer. They're not licensed in the state of Maine, but they're working under the supervision of a licensed Maine engineer. And that allows them to, because she does have a degree and she's licensed elsewhere, to identify herself as an engineer. That is acceptable in the state of Maine. It does not violate any code of ethics or any kind of standard. So at this point, based on our review of the information, the committee would recommend that there is no violation here and that we dismiss the complaint after the investigation that we've done.
As to engineer 3.
Engineer 3, that's all we're talking about right now. We're gonna take them one by one. So I know you all had a lot to look at and read here, and I don't know if there's a flavor to have some discussion about this before we make any motions on it. We could talk about them all and then just do them all at the end, or you want to take them one by one? Anybody have a preference?
I will say you did a nice job summarizing that volume of material.
Thank you.
I guess I'd like to do it at the end.
Okay.
It's just so complicated.
It is, and we obviously want to give careful consideration to this because it has been a long-standing thing, caused a lot of stress and expense for folks. So, okay, so that's number 3. Is there anything you want to talk about on number 3 before we move on to where the committee is on number 1? Okay, so engineer 1 is the principal of the firm that is involved in this situation. That person really had no direct involvement. Obviously the firm principals that are responsible for everything, but they were not really the responsible engineer in charge or directly involved in this project at all. As in its presentation to the board, they didn't stamp the plans. So again, we're kind of in a situation here where they aren't directly involved, and we don't see that there's anything that rose to a violation of any of our standards or ethics based on that very limited involvement. So that's number 1. So then you rise to number 2. 2 is the engineer who is the responsible person in charge of this. Some of the questions are, okay, you're in charge of this situation. You had a survey that was not commissioned by your firm. We're not really quite sure if it got given to them by the developer or exactly how it came into their possession, but it wasn't stamped as a final document. But they proceeded with that and did their design based on that. And it's kind of hard to know whether or not, if it had been stamped anyway by that surveyor, that they wouldn't have stamped the survey, which turned out in the end to be incorrect. Whether that's really that relevant that it wasn't stamped, then they might have just stamped what was presented anyway, and it still would have been wrong. But they represented to the planning board that this was a correct survey, and also at some point may have indicated that the matter was resolved, and it's a little unclear to us whether it really is resolved or not. So I think out of where things stand for engineer 2, the question is do we know for sure that there's a firm complaint here that we can take action on? Do we need to do more investigation of that situation, or do we feel like that it's really not a violation of anything at this point? So that's kind of the question for the board.
Sorry.
That's okay. So I think that's all I've got for introductory comments on that. And unless Tim and David want to chime in.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just not to pile in on that, Manny, that was a great intro. Thank you. Just to make it clear for the record, again, Joyce, your disclosure in previous issue is still consistent for this one. You feel you can still be impartial, Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
So, yeah, a couple of things that I noted as I reviewed the material, and we discussed a little bit in the complaint committee. The engineer of record represented to the planning board in one of the letters to the planning board that engineering firm 1 did not commission the survey. And the engineer of record would have known that because the engineer of record was the engineer of record for this project before they were employed at engineer firm 1. It appears from the documentation that this engineer came to firm number one with this project in their, brought the project with them when they came to engineering firm one, because they had a prior consulting firm of some sort that no longer exists and that had a connection to this development at the time that the initial survey was performed. And so what this engineer of records connection is to that initial survey is unclear, but the fact that they specifically stated that engineering firm one did not commission it struck me as disingenuous, because rather than shed light on this by giving clear information that they knew the source of the survey and that it happened while the project was under their supervision prior to them coming to the firm, they simply denied that the firm they're currently with had anything to do with commissioning the survey. And that, I find that problematic. In addition, there are several representations in the documentation to the planning board that this boundary issue was either close to resolution or in a state of resolution. In the initial review, the planning board stated as one of the conditions that they would not approve the final plan until because there was this dispute about property, and the individual's property that's adjacent to this development, the initial survey claimed that their garage and a good portion of their driveway was actually on the property of the development. And as Manny pointed out, that's quite concerning, of course, to any property owner to have this. So the planning board said, you've got to prove that you own this property before we'll approve this development. The engineer continued to make representations that either there was a resolution or a resolution was imminent, that it wasn't an issue when it was still an issue and remains an issue to this day. The property issue, the boundary issues have not been resolved. And so I'm troubled that the engineer continued to make representations to the planning board that that there was further resolution to this issue than there has been. And I'm a little troubled, frankly, that the planning board went ahead with final approval without having met the conditions of their initial review.
Meaning, I have a question. Well, Tim?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if there's one thing that I don't think I've heard, and I think that the board probably should consider this, that there is a corrected plan that was filed with the planning board. And you'll see that with the, I think the May 3rd letter from, looks like from council to engineer one, I think that's where it is. But in the corrected one, as I understand it, it's a little odd because it's sort of a little cutout of where the property is, or that little cutout, as David said, it's the development sort of goes around it on three sides. It's sort of a little couple degrees this way or a couple degrees that way, and it's either sort of just cutting up against the side of the house one way, or it's sort of half of the driveway and half the garage if you tilt it the other way. So the record was eventually corrected. And I think that's probably worth noting if the board's going to, look at this. So look at the steps that were taken to correct it. Thank you.
So who did the correction, Tim?
Looks like it was engineer number 2, the same person we're talking about, I think. And someone correct me if I got that wrong, but that's what I'm saying.
So here's what happened. The homeowner paid firm 2 to create a new survey. Firm 2 survey was then adopted. It appears, it's hard to tell if firm 3, who had done the initial survey, actually did their own secondary survey, or if they simply took the information off of firm 2's survey and adopted it. So that's a little bit unclear. And the But again, one of my concerns, the documentation in the contract between the homeowner and firm two indicates that the survey would not be sufficient to resolve a boundary dispute. And so I personally, I'm not sure that the boundary issue is resolved by the second survey, whether it's adopted by the firm three or by the planning board. I'm not sure that that issue is actually resolved to the satisfaction, certainly not to the satisfaction of the homeowner, who's, while their garage and driveway is now safe, their house is encroached upon on the other side. And given that the house has been there for 60 years, it's that's still an outstanding issue. That may
Right,
have
which
to
is
be
why
resolved.
this is a very sensitive issue that we want to take care of it in the most proper way we can. But at the same time, I mean, that survey stuff, we're going to deal with the engineering aspects of it, not
Right, right.
resolving that. I mean, because that's not our board.
Well,
So,
yeah, that's what I guess I was going to, is even if the survey was incorrect, what's the engineer's responsibility?
Yeah.
Because, if
Yeah.
it, and now if it wasn't stamped, I think that's an issue, in terms of if it wasn't a final survey, that's an issue. Because you don't know for sure, right? Someone else puts their license on the survey. So as an engineer, I would be looking at that, going with that. I guess I am confused about whether this was resolved. It's obviously not resolved to the homeowner's satisfaction. But in terms of being resolved in the town, I feel like we had a lot of we're not sures and we couldn't really tell. And that for engineer two, we may need to ask some pointed questions to get more information.
mhm.
I don't feel that I could dismiss engineer two today or say let's investigate. I mean, I don't know. I'm just putting it out there, and I would love it if you guys see it differently. Mandy, you've looked at it forever. If you have a path forward you think we should take, but I mean, that's kind of where I am looking. I got lost in all the material sometimes trying to go back and forth as to what really happened. I'll just stop there.
So I'm agreeing from the standpoint that it seems to me a boundary survey at some point in time, a stamped boundary survey was something that was a requirement to be able to proceed with this project. Right title and interest is always to do our work, there needs to be an established right title and interest. And it didn't feel like that was established on this project to be able to push forward the design.
Yeah, no, I would
Yeah.
agree with that. I would agree. You have to do your due diligence if you're gonna start putting stuff on property.
So I didn't see anything that would, with surveys and information, there was no record of saying, you're furthering the cause without knowing that you really have the ability to further that cause. And I didn't see any of that. Like I said, right title and interest, stamped boundary survey, those kind of things that would have been a necessary requirement to be able to represent. I mean, and this project was represented as it can be done based on the information, and the information really wasn't factual.
Do you think, Brent, that asking pointed questions about basically the survey and the right title interest and being pretty specific about those things to engineer two is worthwhile? Or are you ready to say, you are at a place right now where you could make a motion?
I couldn't make a motion.
You can't, but
Mhm.
oops, Tim's helping.
I hope it's helpful, Mr. Chair, if I may. The way this evolved, because frankly, the volume of information coming in, and you see the timeline, it sort of came in dribs and drabs. The information went out to engineer number one, And so the response that we got back was from counsel for engineer one, sort of as counsel for firm number one. But even if engineer two literally knows about this, which reasonable people could assume that, we don't know that today. And if we need to investigate further as to engineer two, the cleaner way to do that might be to frankly close out this complaint, open a new complaint as to engineer two, and frankly, we could ship off the entire file of this to engineer two, say, please respond, boom, here's all the stuff. And that they can be pointed questions in that notice of complaint saying, tell me more about right title and interest. Tell me more about steps you took to correct it. Tell me more, those sort of pointed things like the board's discussing. And then next time you come back, hopefully we'll have some of those answers and maybe be able to address it better.
I know, but like Mandy said, you hate to drag it out another month because how the sensitivity of the issue, particularly for the homeowner. But that may be the only alternative
Yeah,
course of action we've got.
I just want to clarify. I certainly feel like it's worthwhile getting more direct information about what happened here. I mean, well, we can say it's not engineering to do the surveying. Once there's a dispute and something being raised and you don't have a stamped plan to back you up, I mean, it would seem like it would be good practice to make sure that you knew what you were doing as you kept on continuing saying this is the way the property is. So, I mean, that is troubling to me. So I do think it's worth, pursuing further. And that's why I kind of talked them out separately, because I see where you're all coming from.
I'm okay making a motion if you guys want to let me. I would go ahead and move to dismiss engineer 3 and engineer 1, and to dismiss firm 1 from this complaint, but to inform engineer 2 that there is a complaint about his practices and that we specifically want more information about the survey he used, and basically is representing that the boundary dispute was resolved and kind of that chain of events in terms of the survey and the property boundary and sticking to those things.
And Mr. Chair, may I offer a friendly amendment suggestion?
Yes.
Joyce, how about if that were to direct staff to open a new complaint
Yes.
against engineer 2 for all the reasons you stated?
Yep, and to open a new complaint against engineer number 2 for reasons stated.
I'll second.
Okay, roll call vote. Brent,
Yes.
Joyce,
Yes.
Jude,
Yes.
Mandy.
Abstaining.
Oh, abstain. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So by motion of the board, the complaint against engineer 3 is dismissed. The complaint against engineer 1, and to whatever extent the firm, is dismissed, and a new complaint will be filed against engineer 2. Okay. And that concludes the complaint portion of the
I think
meeting.
it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy.
Wow, that was a lot of work, Mandy.
And Joyce, I wasn't against making a motion. I thought it was about engineer 2 that I wasn't ready to make one. So
Oh, yeah, no, that's okay.
Yep.
All right. Now you want to return to the top of the agenda,
yes, let's.
Chair? Okay.
Executive committee. Joyce and I still don't meet, but we did make a decision. We decided that Tim can go to the annual conference if he would like to.